Far away from busy towns and noisy roads, there was a wide land of mountains, forests, and long rivers. Winters were cold and quiet, and summers were short but full of life. In this lonely place lived a man who had chosen a simple and hard life. He was not running away from people, but he wanted peace. He built a small wooden cabin near the edge of a forest, close enough to a river so he could get water and fish. Every morning, he woke up before sunrise, cut wood, checked his traps, and prepared food for the day. Life was slow, but it was honest. The man had come to this land many years earlier. He was once part of a growing settlement, but life there became crowded and loud. Arguments over land, money, and rules tired him. He believed that a man could live better if he depended on his own hands instead of always asking others. So he packed his tools, a few books, some clothes, and walked toward the mountains. Over time, he learned how to survive alone. He learned which plants were safe, how to read the weather by the sky, and how to listen to the forest. He was not afraid of the land or the people who lived near it. He knew that native tribes had lived in these forests long before settlers arrived. He respected that and stayed away from their camps. Sometimes he saw smoke rising far away or heard distant voices carried by the wind. He never crossed into their land without reason. He believed respect kept a man alive. One calm afternoon, after finishing his work, the man walked toward the river with a small bag. He needed fresh water and hoped to catch fish before dark. The river was wide and clear, reflecting the sky like glass. As he knelt by the bank, he noticed movement on the other side. At first, he thought it was a deer, but then he saw a human figure. A young native girl stood near the water, watching him carefully. She was barefoot, her clothes made from simple materials, and her hair was tied back. She could not have been more than 10 or 11 years old. Her eyes were wide with curiosity, but her body was ready to run if needed. The man slowly stood up and took a step back, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. They stood there in silence for a moment, listening to the river flow between them. The man spoke softly, knowing she might not understand his words, but hoping his tone would sound kind. He smiled gently and stepped back again. The girl did not move, but her fear slowly softened. She had likely seen settlers from a distance, but never this close. The man remembered something important. Small actions could decide everything. He slowly reached into his bag and pulled out a piece of dried fruit. He placed it on a flat stone near the water and stepped away. The girl watched closely. After a moment, she moved forward, picked up the fruit, and examined it. She smelled it, then tasted it carefully. When she realized it was safe, she nodded slightly, as if thanking him without words. This small exchange broke the silence between them. They were still strangers, but fear had lost some of its power. The man felt relieved. He had no desire to frighten a child or cause trouble with her people. He picked up his bag, nodded politely, and began to walk back toward his cabin, giving her space. But as he walked, the girl followed him at a distance. She stayed far enough to feel safe, but close enough to keep him in sight. The man noticed her reflection in the water and slowed his steps. He stopped near a fallen log and turned around slowly. From his bag, he took out a small object wrapped in cloth. It was something he had carried with him for years but rarely used. A small mirror. The glass was smooth and clear, framed in simple metal. To him, it was an ordinary object, used for shaving or checking injuries. To someone who had never seen such a thing, it could be surprising. He did not walk toward her. Instead, he placed the mirror on the log and stepped back. The girl approached carefully. She picked it up and turned it in her hands, watching how light moved across its surface. At first, she saw only the sky and trees. Then suddenly, she saw her own face. She froze, her eyes widened, and her breath stopped for a moment. She moved the mirror closer, then farther away. She touched her face with one hand and the glass with the other, confused and amazed. She had seen reflections in water before, but never something so clear, so perfect. The mirror showed her every expression, every blink. The man watched quietly, realizing he might have done something far bigger than he intended. The girl's reaction was not playful, it was deep and emotional. She looked at herself for a long time, as if seeing her own identity in a new way. Then she looked at the man. Fear, mixed with wonder. She quickly wrapped the mirror in the cloth, held it tightly against her chest, and stepped back. Without a word, she turned and ran toward the forest, disappearing between the trees. The man stood alone again by the river. The forest was quiet, but something felt different. He felt uneasy. Not because he had done something wrong, but because he did not understand the meaning of his action to her people. He had offered a gift without knowing how it would be received beyond that moment. As he walked back to his cabin, his thoughts were heavy. He wondered what the girl would tell her family. Would they think he was kind or dangerous? Would the mirror be seen as a simple object or something powerful? He reminded himself that he had acted calmly and with good intentions. That night, the forest felt unusually still. The wind moved slowly through the trees, and the fire in his cabin crackled softly. The man sat by the fire, thinking about the girl's face when she first saw her reflection. It was not joy or fear alone, it was something deeper, like surprise mixed with discovery. He did not know that this small mirror, given without a second thought, had already begun a chain of events. The girl was running back to her people, carrying a reflection they had never held in their hands before, and soon, the quiet life of the man in the mountains would no longer be so quiet. But for now, the cabin remained alone, standing under the stars, unaware that many eyes would soon turn toward it. The young girl did not stop running until her legs began to ache and her breath came fast and uneven. Trees rushed past her as she followed the narrow paths she knew since childhood. The forest felt different that day. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow seemed deeper. She kept one hand pressed tightly against the cloth bundle at her chest, afraid that if she loosened her grip, the strange object inside might disappear or change. When she finally reached her people's camp, the evening fire was already burning. Women were preparing food, and children were playing near the edge of the clearing. The girl slowed her steps, her heart still beating fast. Several people noticed her at once. They could tell something had happened. Her face showed a mix of excitement and worry, emotions that rarely came together. She moved straight toward the elders, who sat near the fire speaking quietly. Without a word, she knelt and carefully unwrapped the cloth. When the mirror was revealed, it caught the firelight and sent a bright shine across the circle. Some people leaned back in surprise. Others leaned forward, curious. The girl lifted the mirror so they could see. At first, the elders saw only flames and faces moving strangely on the smooth surface. One elder reached out slowly, then pulled his hand back, unsure if it was safe. When the mirror turned toward him, he saw his own face staring back. His eyes widened, and a quiet murmur spread through the group. Word traveled fast through the camp. People gathered around, speaking in low voices. Some laughed softly, thinking it was a clever trick. Others looked uneasy, whispering warnings. They had seen reflections in water, but never something that could be carried, something that could hold a face so clearly. The girl explained what had happened as best as she could. She spoke about the man by the river, how he stood calmly, how he gave food, and how he placed the object on the log without coming closer. She described how the mirror showed her face like clear water that never moved. Some believed her story. Others questioned why a stranger would give such a thing to a child. As night fell, the mirror became the center of attention. People took turns holding it, turning it this way and that. Children laughed at their own expressions, while adults watched carefully, thinking deeply. The elders spoke among themselves, their voices serious. They had seen many changes in their lifetime. New people had come to the land, bringing tools, weapons, and ideas. Some changes brought trade. Others brought loss. To the elders, the mirror was not just an object. It was a sign. a sign that the outside world was reaching deeper into their lives. They wondered what kind of man lived alone in the forest and why he carried such things. Was he a peaceful person, or was he opening a door that could not be closed? That night, the mirror was placed near the fire, watched closely. No one slept easily. Dreams were filled with moving faces and shining light. Some dreamed of the river, others of the stranger's cabin hidden among the trees. The next morning, the elders called a meeting. The girl sat quietly nearby, listening. The elders spoke about safety, respect, and caution. They agreed that fear alone should not guide their actions, but neither should blind trust. They decided they must learn more about the man before making any choice. A few strong and calm members of the tribe were chosen to observe. They would not approach the cabin yet. They would watch from a distance, learn his habits, and see if he posed any danger. The girl was told to stay close to the camp and not return to the river alone. Over the following days, quiet figures moved through the forest like shadows. From high ground and behind thick trees, they watched the man's cabin. They saw him chopping wood, carrying water, and tending to his fire. He spoke to no one and showed no signs of preparing for trouble. He seemed unaware of the eyes watching him. Still, stories grew as they passed from one person to another. Some said the mirror held a person's spirit. Others believed it was a tool of knowledge. Each telling added a little more fear or wonder. The object itself remained wrapped and protected, only shown when elders were present. The girl often thought about the man. She remembered his calm face and slow movements. She felt he had not meant harm. Yet she also understood why her people were careful. The forest had taught them that not everything that shines is safe. One evening, as the sun sank low, one of the watchers returned with news. The man had been seen looking toward the forest, as if he sensed something. This worried the elders. They did not want fear to grow on either side. After long discussion, they decided the time for watching alone was ending. They would approach the cabin soon, not with anger, but with presence. They believed that standing together would show strength and unity, not threat. As the night grew quiet, the man sat in his cabin, unaware of the decisions being made. He felt watched, but could not explain why. The mirror, now far from him, had changed the balance of silence between two worlds. And while the forest slept, steps were already being planned. The calm days were ending, and the path toward the cabin was no longer empty. The morning began like any other for the man in the cabin. But something felt different. The air was heavier, and the forest seemed too quiet. Birds that usually sang at sunrise were silent. Even the river, though still flowing, sounded distant. The man stepped outside his cabin and stood still, listening. Years of living alone had taught him to notice small changes. This silence was not natural. He moved slowly, careful not to show fear. He checked his tools, made sure nothing was left outside, and then sat on the small wooden step in front of his cabin. The sun climbed higher, and light passed through the trees. But the feeling did not leave him. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then he saw movement. At first, it was just shadows between the trees. Then shapes became clearer. People were standing among the trees, silent and still. They were not rushing, not hiding. They were simply there. Within moments, he realized that his cabin was surrounded. His heart beat faster, but he stayed calm. He stood up slowly and raised his hands slightly, palms open. He remembered the girl by the river and her wide eyes. He hoped her people would remember his calm too. More figures stepped forward, forming a wide circle around the cabin. Men and women stood together, their faces serious. No one shouted. No one ran. The quiet was deep, and it carried weight. The man took a step forward, then stopped, waiting. He knew better than to move too quickly. He spoke softly, even though he knew they might not understand his words. His voice was steady, meant to show peace, not control. Among the group, the young girl stepped forward. The man felt a small wave of relief when he saw her. She held something wrapped in cloth. He guessed what it was. The mirror. She looked at him, then at her people. She spoke quietly, pointing toward the man, then toward the river, repeating calm gestures. Though he did not understand her words, he understood her meaning. She was explaining. The elders listened carefully. One of them, older and taller than the rest, stepped closer to the cabin. His face showed caution, but also curiosity. He studied the man's eyes, his posture, the simple tools around him. He saw no signs of danger. The man slowly walked to a small table near his cabin and placed a piece of bread on it. He stepped back and waited. This simple act was not meant as a trade, only as a sign of goodwill. The elder nodded slightly. The girl carefully unwrapped the mirror and held it up. The sunlight reflected from it, catching the attention of everyone. The elder looked into it and saw his own face clearly. He did not step back this time. Instead, he watched quietly, as if meeting himself for the first time. The man spoke again, pointing gently at the mirror, then at the river, and then at the sky. He was trying to show that the mirror only showed what already existed. It did not create anything new, it only reflected. The elders spoke among themselves. Their voices were low and serious. The circle remained, but the tension slowly softened. People relaxed their shoulders, some lowered their hands. The elder finally spoke, his voice calm but strong. The girl helped with gestures, helping both sides understand each other's intentions. The message was clear. The people wanted to know who the man was and why he lived alone. The man placed his hand on his chest and spoke his name. Then he pointed to the cabin, the forest, and the mountains. He explained his simple life with slow words and actions. He showed them his tools, his food, and the small fire pit he used for warmth. Everything he showed was open and honest. The people watched closely. They saw no hidden plans, no signs of harm, just a man surviving quietly. Still, the elders had one concern. They spoke about the mirror and other objects like it. They wanted to know what else the man carried. He understood their worry. Slowly, he went inside his cabin and returned with his bag. He opened it carefully, showing its contents one by one. Simple tools, clothes, books with worn pages, nothing threatening. When he reached the bottom of the bag, it was empty. He turned it upside down to show there was nothing more. A long silence followed. Then the elder nodded. The circle slowly loosened. People stepped back, though they did not leave. The danger had passed, but trust was still fragile. The elders made it clear through gestures and words that the man could stay, but with respect for their land and people. No more gifts without understanding, no more surprises. The man nodded in agreement. He felt a deep sense of relief. He understood now how one small object could create great fear. He promised, in his way, to be more careful. The girl stepped forward one last time. She held the mirror out toward the man, offering it back. He gently pushed her hand away and smiled. He wanted her to keep it, but only if her people allowed it. She looked at the elders, who nodded slowly. As the people began to leave, the man stood quietly, watching them disappear into the trees. The forest slowly returned to its natural sounds. Birds sang again. The river sounded close once more. The cabin was no longer just a lonely home, it had become a place known to many. The man knew that life would never be the same again. But he also knew that understanding had taken its first step, and as the last figure vanished into the forest, he closed his eyes for a moment, grateful that calm had won over fear. After the people left, the forest slowly returned to its normal rhythm. The man stood outside his cabin for a long time, listening to the familiar sounds he had trusted for years. Birds moved between branches, the river whispered in the distance, and the wind touched the trees softly. Yet, inside him, something had changed. The land felt the same, but his place in it was different now. That evening, he did not light his fire right away. He sat quietly, thinking about everything that had happened. He understood now that living alone did not mean living unseen. His actions, even small ones, could reach far beyond his cabin. The mirror had taught him a lesson he would never forget. The next few days passed calmly, but they were not empty. The man noticed signs of presence around his cabin. Footprints appeared near the trees, not close enough to threaten, but close enough to observe. Smoke from distant fires rose at times, reminding him that he was no longer truly alone. Still, no one approached him directly. He continued his daily work as usual. He cut wood, gathered water, and repaired parts of his cabin. But now he worked with more awareness. He made sure his actions were slow and clear. He avoided wandering too far toward the river where he first met the girl. He wanted to show respect without needing words. One afternoon, as the sun began to lower, he saw a familiar figure standing near the edge of the forest. It was the young girl. She was not alone this time. Two elders stood a short distance behind her. They did not move forward, but they did not turn away either. The man stepped out of his cabin and stood still. He waited. The girl walked forward carefully. She smiled slightly, not with excitement, but with comfort. She spoke a few words softly and held out a small bundle of herbs and dried food. It was a gift, simple and honest. The man accepted it with both hands and bowed his head slightly. He understood this moment mattered. This was not just food. It was a sign. From that day on, small exchanges became part of life. The people never entered his cabin, and he never entered their camp. But sometimes food would be left near a tree. Sometimes he would leave tools he no longer needed. Each exchange was careful and respectful. The mirror was rarely mentioned. The girl kept it, but it was no longer treated as something mysterious. Over time, it became just another object, used with understanding. The elders made sure it did not create fear or false stories. It became a lesson instead of a symbol of worry. Seasons changed. Summer turned to autumn, and autumn slowly moved toward winter. Snow covered the ground, making the forest quiet again. During the coldest days, the man noticed smoke rising closer than before. One night, a fire burned not far from his cabin. He knew it was not an accident. The next morning, one of the elders approached alone. He carried a thick blanket and placed it on a rock near the cabin. Through slow gestures, he explained that winter was hard for everyone, even those who lived alone. The man accepted the blanket with deep gratitude. This moment marked a new understanding. They did not become close friends, but they became neighbors. Silent respect grew stronger than fear ever had. Years passed. The man grew older, his hair turning gray, his steps slower. The girl grew into a young woman. She still remembered the day by the river. But now she understood it differently. What once felt like magic now felt like knowledge. Travelers who passed through the land sometimes spoke of a quiet man who lived near the forest and a people who respected him. They said there was peace there, built not by words, but by patience. One spring morning, the man sat outside his cabin, watching the river reflect the sky. The water moved gently, just like it had on the day he met the girl. He smiled to himself, realizing how small moments could shape entire lives. He no longer carried mirrors or unfamiliar objects when walking near the river. Instead, he carried understanding. He had learned that kindness must walk together with awareness. As the sun rose higher, he stood and returned to his work. The forest welcomed him, as it always had, and somewhere beyond the trees, a young woman held a mirror. Not to fear it, but to remember how two worlds once stood still, looked at each other, and chose peace.